you come from this absolutely beautiful, spiritual, contemplative approach to nature. What are your thoughts when you look at something like Monsanto and GMO products?
Well, I see those as the continuation of World War II into the world of agriculture.
Okay.
So at the end of World War II, a lot of the chemical corporations had been employed by the U.S. government to develop things like napalm and Agent Orange, which are the sister chemical constituents to Roundup. And these chemical agricultural products were clearly just an attempt to continue to stay in the marketplace for corporations who had developed more insidious methods of killing and annihilating human beings, and they just slightly changed the chemical formulas so that we would kill and annihilate the basic fabric of life as we purportedly grow food for ourselves.
And I believe that Monsanto actually was involved with the making of Agent Orange.
Absolutely.
That really, there is a link there. For me, what's interesting now that you bring up the whole topic of war was that I actually became aware of this topic mainly around 2004 when the U.S. invaded and then occupied Iraq. And then Paul Bremer, was put there in charge of the Coalition Provisional Authority. And what they did, because the Iraqis had a very long tradition of farming. Now, they had been bombed, many times, and they had lost their water infrastructure, but they had very good system of farming. They used, the seeds that had been passed down for generations. Well, when Paul Bremer left, he put down 100 orders, and order number 81 was essentially saying that people could not use their seeds anymore. And so it was opening up the path to GMO products. Basically, what he was saying was that before in Iraq, you could not patent a seed. And what this Order 81 said, if anybody just describes a seed, then they patent it automatically, and then they own it. So, for example, if Nestle goes in there and describes a seed that has been used in an Iraqi family for years and years, that means that Nestle owns it, and that family's not allowed to use it anymore. Kind of crazy logic. So I think that you touched on a point, and when war actually hits the food system, then you don't really need other kinds of weapons. And so to continue that kind of militaristic analogy, I think makes a whole lot of sense right now when you look at what's happening to our domestic food supply.
Absolutely.
It's very scary. There's one other thing that I just wanted to say. For me as a Californian, we have right now, there's Proposition 37 that's going to require labeling of some foods, and it's a really big deal. But the interesting thing is you've got, for example, the corporations and, Monsanto and also these big corporations have put in $25 million to fight this. And the organic farmers and the, other people, have tried to put in, $2 million or something. And so it's also a money war.
Absolutely.
You've got these huge companies fighting against, the little people. And so the stakes, though, are very, very high. Now, I understand that you were involved, at least in speaking at, a lawsuit that had taken place in New York just a couple of months ago. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. That was the Millions against Monsanto, and it was a court case where Monsanto is trying to sue farmers for infringement on copyright laws because of pollen drift into a farmer's field from some of their genetically modified varieties, and then suing those farmers for infringement on the copyrights that they have for their genetically modified crops.
Now, can you put that into really easy words?
Yeah, so what's happening is, and then the farmers are countersuing.
Okay.
So the farmers are saying, we're actually losing income because your genetically modified corn. It's sort of like who got the chocolate in the peanut butter kind of story. No, your chocolate is in my peanut butter. No, your peanut butter's in my chocolate. Okay. That's basically what's happening right now in the Monsanto's trying to make an example of farmers and say, look, we can sue you if you have any even sconce of this material that we have created on your farm.
Which is so patently goofy, because if there's wind,
Of
probably
course,
someone
right.
is going to go. And
Right.
so, I think that's a really important lawsuit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's trying to, both parties want to set a precedent.
Yeah.
So Monsanto wants to set a precedent that they can strong-arm any farmer, no matter who they are, into having to belly up and deal with their agenda
Yeah.
to enforce these protocols. And then the organic, more local, more responsible farmers are wanting to also make the example, no, you can't just strong-arm us and force your agenda on us. We're actually going to make a case that we're losing significant income because you have now contaminated our organic corn with your genetically modified corn.
And so now what happened? They threw the case out of court, and now the farmers are appealing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in an
Okay.
appeals process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which kind of, it just seems silly that we're even fighting something like that, but when you get big
Right.
money and big ag together, against, the little people, then you really do have to fight step by step. But on the
Absolutely.
surface, it just seems kind of transparent, I don't know.
Well, I think
Yeah.
it gets back to a lot of deeper issues that we have in this country, like the revolving door between dirty
Okay.
industries and the government, so that the head of
Okay.
Monsanto can become the head of USDA and can do things to stack the deck in their favor when they're in office, so that when they go back into private industry,
Exactly.
they're able to do all kinds of things that at face value make no ethical sense. I think generally in law that would be called a conflict of interest, to have people who have a calculated economic interest becoming decision makers in our legislative bodies and then going back to work for those very same private industries is clearly something that needs to be stopped if we actually want to have a system that is by the people and for the people, and not by the corporations and for the corporations.
Absolutely, and it's so across the board. I mean, it's not only here, but
Right.
wasn't Hillary Clinton once a lawyer for Monsanto? I
You
think
may
too.
know more about that
So,
than I do.
but
That wouldn't surprise me.
But the kind of revolving door thing,
Yeah.
clearly, so that is an issue. So, and also the media doesn't, the normal, commercial media certainly doesn't talk about these issues very much either.
Right.
So you have, the government revolving door, you have the media silence. What is your particular, theory about why the media is silent on these issues, relatively?
Because of who owns them.
Yeah.
So since Westinghouse owns, CBS, since
Yeah.
General Electric owns NBC, you have some of the largest weapons contractors, some of the larger multinational corporations in the world controlling the information highways. So they practice what Noam Chomsky calls selective misinformation. So rather than skewing things, they just don't cover a vast amount of information that's very important and relevant to people, and just continue to cover topical pop sort of culture issues without digging into the issues that are actually affecting the health and well-being of the American people or the world.
So in a way, it's kind of interesting, because the media consolidation also leads to a consolidation or lack of diversity, even in something as basic as our seeds and our food and stuff like that. And so,
Exactly.
this monopoly just kind of descends. So I guess there's one other point that I wanted to mention for me. Also, the Gates Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation, in many ways we say, well, they do really wonderful work, and I'm sure they do, but, the Bill Gates Foundation owns a lot of Monsanto, and they're really, really pushing genetically modified products, and so you also have to ask some questions about what might be going on there. So what I'd like to do before we move on to the whole topic of permaculture is to discuss some of the actual dangers, the physical dangers of GMO products. Now, there have been so many studies done, and just some that, I'm thinking of, for example, just last month, a Russian biologist found that GMO products led to both infertility and also stunted growth in, some kind of rodents. In Austria, they found that mice became infertile, mice who had been fed GMO products. In India, there were all of these dead sheep and other animals that ate GMO food. Yet, what's interesting is that the Monsanto and DuPont and these other companies always say, there's been no studies that proved anything. And so it's almost like a parallel universe of information,
Right.
Which is kind of hard, I guess I would say. So what I would like to do then is to move away from the negative part of this and then get into the kind of beautiful element that you were talking about, instead of this kill, kill, kill stuff, to think more in terms of, the diversity in permaculture and how we can actually live in a healthful way. So let's first start with, what are some ways that people in New York can take action, either to protect themselves against these kinds of negative products? Let's first focus on that.
Well, more broadly, I'd say that what it is that we're dealing with is a health issue, health and well-being. And what we lack is an understanding in this culture and as individuals of how to heal ourselves, what's essential to be a healthy, strong, functioning person in the world today is to pay attention to our diet.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that all of these problems in the marketplace of chemicals and of the effects they're having are precedented by the very same health problems from herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides.
Okay.
And those are also legal and allowed to be used and are very deadly and are widespread. It's to the point to where it's estimated that your average American woman's breast milk would not be legal to sell over the counter as cow's milk because of how many heavy metals, synthetic chemicals, and other types of petrochemical residues are in our physiologies. And I think that what people have the power to do to address these types of issues is to change what it is that they're spending their money on, change what it is that they're putting into their bodies, for people to remember that eating is a sacred act, that food is medicine. Food is not just something that we're filling ourselves with. In general, the whole phenomenon of genetically engineered crops is the outgrowth of a marketplace that has been dominated by the corporate sector in terms of food production and has not had enough small producers who can do things totally organically and in a diversified way. And those issues of the pollution and the arrival of GMOs are an outgrowth of a lack of another sector of growers who are occupying the marketplace. In other words, what we need is more local production, more beyond organic production, more people buying those types of products and simply not buying, not supporting chemically agriculturally produced food or genetically produced food, because it's a huge health risk. It's something that is going to cause you to die of cancer prematurely and at an earlier age than you would if you don't eat chemically produced food with high fructose corn syrup in it, if you don't eat food that's laden with genetically modified organisms, right? So the most effective way, I think, for people to create change is to change what it is that they're buying for many reasons, right? The most important of which is to be a healthy, highly functioning human being who can perform well in the world. And what people don't tend to realize is that the air they breathe, the water they drink, the food they eat, all ultimately are what make them healthy and well. And if you're not vigilant in the present marketplace about what you eat and where it came from, there's a high likelihood that you are ingesting things that are very deleterious to your health under the auspices of simply satisfying your hunger.
No, that's a really good point. And I think it brings a meta issue that one of the as far as I know, one of the premises of permaculture is that you take your time, but in our daily life, it's like, fast, 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 push, push, certainly in New York City. And so I think that's one of the conflicts, if you will. For example, I was in a restaurant and they had a, plastic container filled with an apple that had been cut who knows when, and the apple was not brown, and, so it's like, oh, that can't be good, what is in that apple, but somebody who wants to go fast, they're going to pick it up, they're not going to be very contemplative about what they eat, and so in a way, we can't only change our diet, we have to change our lifestyles, and basically big ag and the big factory farmers are not going to give up, and so we also have to change the system. Do you think that will actually happen?
Well, it is happening. It is happening, and it has been happening. And part of why people are even concerned about genetically modified food is because of the fact that the organic sector is as large a part of the marketplace and the cultural consciousness as it is. Because if you just turn back the clock a little bit and look at the early 80s, you'll see that organic was maybe $1 billion of the GNP annually in the United States. And if you look at it now, it's well over 27 billion of the annual GNP that's coming in. I'm talking about products that are not just USDA organic, but are also OCIA, Oregon Tilth, all the other certification, because certainly USDA people will critique it and say that that level of organic is not as organic as it could be, which is certainly the case.
But what would that be percentage-wise? I mean, is that a big growth? I mean, the number is, but then possibly the GDP grew as well. So is that a big growth in the percentage as
It's
well?
a huge growth, yeah, and every
Okay.
year it's growing usually 5 to 7%. So it's a significant growth sector in the marketplace. And, the appreciation and the money behind supporting local food and local agriculture has also just skyrocketed in the last 30 years. So if you looked at things like community-supported agriculture farms that are doing direct market, local, beyond organic, you'd see that that went from about 1,200 just 5 years ago to well over 2,500, with 200 new farms that are beyond organic and local opening up just in Long Island in the last 2 years. So the local food movement, the regional food movement, is growing because the awareness of the American people in certain population pockets is also growing and is creating a demand that now is driving a new market and a new economy. And personally, I see that to be the most hopeful sector of growth, is to simply start supporting what you do want and stop supporting what you don't want. And as soon as people look clearly and consciously about their decisions with their dollars, they'll see that what's most important is to be very intentional about who it is you're supporting when you buy food. And realizing that it's not only about an ethical intelligence as far as the market and what we create as far as products and ways of doing business in the world, but it's also intelligent in terms of our own health, our own well-being, our own resistance to the constant deleterious pollution loads that we're inundated with. You know, in New York City, the city has never once been in compliance with the Clean Air Act. So you need all your local, beyond organic, seasonal produce as a way to fortify your immune system when you're dealing with all of this inundation from a society that's basically held hostage by corporate agendas that don't even abide by our most basic environmental laws.
That's the point that actually I was going to hit on too, because, for example, the big issue now is they might be bringing this fracked water into, the West Village. You got 600 chemicals that, go and, pump this stuff out. What kind of body burden is that? Our cleaning products that we use in the house, they're not regulated.
Right.
It's interesting, in Europe, they're regulated very carefully, the cleaning products, but here, or other, shampoo or things such as that. And so it's not only our food, it's our water, it's being very, very aware of just the basics of how we live our lives, and we haven't been trained that way. You said that, you came from this Quaker upbringing, and this was just a part of who you were. Many of us it isn't a part of how we have been raised or how we have been adults. And so it really represents a great shift, but one that's very important, and possibly looking at food is a good first start.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, the whole idea behind permaculture? So
Sure.
Teach us some of that stuff.
Sure. So permaculture is really a term that frames what it is that we've been talking about. Which is creating an ethic of how to live in a way that creates the world that we want to see.
Okay.
And looking at designs of buildings, designs of farms. In particular, it focuses on agriculture and looks at how do we redesign agriculture to be deeply ecological, deeply socially responsible, and economically viable. And so it's creative in that what it's looking at is how do we design a way for us to live our lives that is attentive to the triple bottom line of the world that we live in.
Triple bottom line.
Triple bottom line is a term you'll hear in sustainable economics.
Okay.
And it's the idea that we need a new economy that pays attention to ecology, equity, and to economic viability, but that we need to pay attention to all three of those variables, not just economic profit margins, but that we have to involve people and the health of the people and ecology and the health of the ecology. So permaculture is about thinking and designing our way out of an ecological crisis that we see as a result of a lack of attention or intention to what it is that we do in our daily lives.
And so what kind of things do you do at the Center for Bioregional Diversity?
Well, most of what we do there is teach people and train people in how to apply permaculture in urban settings, in suburban settings. We're focusing a lot on the northeastern part of the United States and how to retrofit.
Do I have to be a farmer, or can I just be somebody with some tomatoes on my terrace?
Oh, even less involved in propagating food than that to study with us. A lot of what our focus is really in how do we use permaculture as a design tool to retrofit the entire infrastructure.
Okay.
So people who are engineers, people who are in software, people who are in fashion, people who are accountants are studying with us as to how do we incorporate a new ethic, a new ecological way of doing what we already do, whatever that is, in our private lives. If we're an accountant, how do we design an accounting business that's more ecologically attentive in terms of business models? You know, if we're doing fashion, where are we sourcing our textiles from? How are they produced?
Okay.
So it's a whole ecological intelligence that we're training up our students in.
Okay.
And then we also do client consultation and design for people who are working with properties, working with business models. In which case, that's work where we're actually looking at the client's project and consulting with them on how to apply what it is that we also teach to our students.
Okay. If you think of, Monsanto as, genetically modified organisms as, kill, 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 then this is just a beautiful alternative and something that we can all learn from.
Absolutely.
So the bottom line is that we each have a choice in this life. We can, basically, if we take our time and focus on awareness, then anything is possible. As we change ourselves, then we can also change the society around us. And it begins with something as basic as food. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I appreciate that very much.